Thank you. And I'm sure the candidates welcome and thank your support. And I'd like to ask the audience, in the interest of moving the evening along, that they would hold their applause until the end of the forum tonight, and that way we'll be able to use our time efficiently and move along. As I said, this is a first in a series of forums we're hoping to have this campaign season to focus on issues of interest in Oakland. In future forums, we're going to focus on homelessness and the concerns of our low-income population, the concerns of the business community, economic development, downtown development, but also a forum on neighborhood development and neighborhood issues, and a forum on our youth and how to help them survive and thrive. So tonight's forum, however, is going to be more general in focus. We're hoping to cover a wide variety of topics and to particularly focus on issues of philosophy of governance. So we are inviting questions from the floor, but in the interest of covering a wide variety of questions, we may not get to all your questions, but we will use them in future forums. Our format tonight is our standard League of Women Voters format. Each candidate will have 5 minutes for an opening statement. We will then move into a period of questions with 3-minute answers and then 3-minute closing statements. So now, without further delay, we'll begin with our opening statements. Our order of speaking was determined tonight by lot, and we will begin with Mayor Harris.
Thank you. Catherine, thank you very much. I was elected in 1990 on a platform of change, opening up the windows and doors of City Hall to increase the base of participation, to allow more people access to their city government. We began that by having town hall meetings throughout the city. In addition, we went to neighborhood merchants and neighborhood organizations to find out the perspectives, the concerns that they had. We then embarked upon a strategic plan, Oakland Sharing the Vision, that began to define the future course of the city, an agenda for the future, a direction that was really going to allow Oakland to be the kind of city we all want it to be, a city that is peaceful, prosperous, and proud, a city where diversity is a strength, where we really make it hometown to the world, where everyone feels welcome and included. And that's not easy. It's a difficult struggle when people have different philosophies, people come from different economic backgrounds, different languages, ethnicities, religions, cultures. We strive to do that in Oakland because people in this community are in fact its most important resource. People who've overcome the adversity of personal circumstance, people who've always been resilient in the face of disasters, earthquakes, fires, whatever, coming together to make this a better community. And it doesn't mean that there hasn't been anger and frustration. Our lives have changed. They changed certainly by the shrinking world in which we live, certainly by the economic recession that overwhelms and changes our society, certainly by the value system that often see crime permeated where at once there was peace in our neighborhoods. But responding to that is a responsibility that really does involve inclusion. It involves a sense of working together, identifying the problems and identifying the solutions. So in addition to Oakland Sharing the Vision, we began to identify other issues that needed to be addressed in the city, including the General Plan Congress, so we'd be able to look at the land and economic uses of the city and how we would in fact be able to maximize the benefits of our natural environment. We have been working assiduously to make sure that that vision is going to be realized. By laying a foundation, there are no quick fix solutions, there are no easy answers to the problem to confront this or any other community. The last dozen years have not been kind to urban America. Central cities have been neglected. With the largest number of poor people, the most deteriorated infrastructure has existed. But rather than complain or blame, this city has worked to deal with these problems. Our tax base has shrunk from many reasons, including an abandonment by federal and state government. But you should understand that despite of all these difficulties, we've made tremendous progress. We've achieved enterprise zone status. We're now in the process of dredging our port to 42 feet to take the next container ship category that will come into our harbor. We have now attracted almost every major shipper into the Bay Area. Jack London Waterfront is again coming alive with the Yoshis, the 9-screen theater, and the other attributes of a retail center. And we're doing the same thing with our downtown, evaluating plans for a mixed-use project in our downtown, and again, seeing a revitalized City Hall. We're working to make sure that the Broadway spine is going to reflect the quality of a downtown, but it takes time revitalizing downtown when people have fled to the suburbs with malls and acres of free parking. We're bringing back retail into our community, Pack and Save, Smart and Final. Other retailers like Super Kmart and the Costco. But these are very important because they really do reflect a sense of the possibilities of a retail marketplace within our city. But more importantly, we've been working in our neighborhoods, dealing with the problems of crime, with community policing, beginning to understand that we have to begin working together to make our neighborhoods safer, that each of us has a responsibility. The police cannot do it alone. It must be interactive, taking responsibility for our children. We have worked with community policing, and we're seeing a difference. Our crime rate has gone down over the last 24 months, 9 months last year, and 13% year to date, despite what you may hear to the contrary. It is making a difference. We're fighting to maintain it, and another 140 police officers will also make a difference as the crime bill has now been signed by the President. You should also understand that as we move forward on this, we've not neglected our children. Working with birth to school projects, doubling the number of students in Head Start. We've now talked about K through 12 as not just a place where parents drop off their kids in kindergarten and pick them up in the 12th grade, but a place where real education is changing, the academies programs. I'll be talking about during the course of this debate, but understand change is happening in Oakland. We open up the doors of City Hall and everyone is welcome. The neighborhoods are changing because of the people who live here, not just because of who's mayor. Thank you.
Our next opening statement will be given by Ted Dang.
I was born and raised right here in Oakland. I grew up the hard way. I worked to help support my family. I graduated from Westlake and Oakland Tech. My 2 children, Jeffrey and Stephanie, attend Oakland Public Schools. I've been a successful realtor developer for over 20 years. I'm proud of my record as a businessman. I'm proud of my relationships with my tenants, my clients, and my investors. And I'm proud that for 20 years, I've also been involved in the community, and I've helped establish nonprofit corporations like the nationally recognized East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation. Oakland's been good to me. That's why I'm running for mayor, because I refuse to stand by and watch the quickening decay of the city I love. I believe we all must give something back, especially when our city cries out for a new direction and strong leadership. I currently serve as president of the Hiller Highlands Homes Association. I've been a principal for a day in 3 public schools. I serve on the board of the Child Assault Prevention Program. For 7 years, I was a commissioner on the Oakland Housing Authority. And for 2 terms, I was chairman of the board of the Oakland Chamber of Commerce. As a successful businessman, I've created thousands of jobs and generated millions of dollars for the Oakland economy. That's what I do. I create jobs. I'm good at it. And today, it's what Oakland needs the most. 16 years ago, things began to change in Oakland. It was 1978. That's when Elihu Harris was first elected to the Assembly to help make things better for Oakland. Back then, Oakland was a different place. That's when they called us the city of families, when churches, not guns, were the rule. That's when economic experts said downtown was destined to become a boom town. Today, it's a ghost town. In short, everything has changed in Oakland. Everything except the career politicians who have run it to the ground. 16 years later, after 12 scandal-tinged years in the Assembly and 4 failed years as mayor, Elihu Harris is still here, and he's still failing. I'm embarrassed about the current money laundering scandal and unethical behavior associated with our city and some of Oakland's career politicians. And I'm outraged that the course of his career, Elihu Harris has voted himself 4 taxpayer-paid pay raises while thousands of Oaklanders were losing their job. Over the past 16 years, violent crime in Oakland has escalated dramatically. In 1978, Oakland was victimized by 106 murders. In 1992, Oakland set a new homicide record, 175 people dead. And this year, Oakland is on course to set yet another homicide record. This year, there have been 110 murders already. And in the past 4 years, 616 Oaklanders have lost their lives to violence. But last June, Harris still voted to chop 30 cops from Oakland's depleted force. Creating jobs and attracting businesses is something Oakland has always done on its own. Oakland has the best weather, the best location, and neighborhoods of tightly knit communities. But after 16 years of career politician Elihu Harris, businesses become frustrated with government and political inaction. So they packed up and they moved out, and they took their jobs with them. The fact is, the good times are gone. Unemployment in Oakland is up 60% in the last 4 years. Over 150 businesses have left town. 9,000 jobs have been chased away. In the next hour, you're going to hear excuses from Harris as to why Oakland has failed while other cities have flourished. You'll hear explanations from Harris why Oakland can't move ahead while the rest of the Bay Area does. And you'll hear justifications from Harris why Oakland has the highest murder rate, jobless rate, and business failure rate of any city in the East Bay. You're going to hear stories about earthquakes and recessions, and a million other excuses why things have gotten worse for Oakland while other cities have put excuses on the shelf and still moved ahead. The truth is, it's not Oakland that's failed, it's Elihu Harris who's failed. And today, 16 years later, Elihu Harris is still running for political office one more time. He says he needs another 4 years to finish the job. Well, if Harris can't finish the job in 16 years, he shouldn't be there in the first place. Here's the bottom line. If Oakland wants change, we must change our leadership. Because 16 years is too long to wait for safe streets downtown. 16 years is too long to wait for new jobs in East and West Oakland. 16 years is too long to wait for safer schools. And 16 years is too long to wait for change. In the course of this debate, I look forward to outlining for you my 64-page action plan for Oakland, my plans to put 100 cops on the streets in the first year of my administration, my plans to bring back 9,000 jobs that Harris lost, my plans to expand Oakland's economic base, and to make Oakland the world-class city it truly is.
I hope. Let's try to hold it down because now we will move into our period of questions. We're going to go to 3-minute answers. Each candidate will have the opportunity to answer each question, and we're going to rotate the order of answering. As again, if you would hold your applause to the end, we'll be able to move through more questions in the next hour. We'll begin in the order of that we do in the order of speaking for the opening statements. We'll begin with you, Mayor Harris. When one looks at all of the challenges facing Oakland and, in fact, facing any elected official in an urban area today, many of the people here in the room want to know of both candidates, why do you want to be mayor?
Because I really believe in the city. I really believe that it's more than one individual. When I listen to Mr. Dang and describing all the problems in Oakland as being my fault, then I feel that I'm much more powerful than anyone ever imagined. But somehow or other that I've created the crime, that I have created the unemployment, that he doesn't seem to have a sense of reality for someone who's lived in this city for 42 years. But obviously his memory is different than sure most of the people who live here. Problems in Oakland have been long-term, but the reality is that Oakland is a city of possibilities, a city of positive possibilities. We work to reduce the crime rate, we reduce to increase the number of jobs. We have 2,000 more people working in this city than we did last year. Oakland is not a microcosm, it is not an island. It is in fact part of the state of California. When there is a national recession and a state recession, Oakland suffers. Central cities are part of where the problems have permeated and existed too long. We're trying to reverse that field. We're doing it by working, not talking about the problems. Mr. Dang talks about a book that he wrote, I don't know when he wrote it, because I tell you, I got a book from Dick Reardon, looks just like it. And maybe if he copied the book, he might have an understanding why Dick Reardon talked about 1,500 police officers and still doesn't have them. But the reality is, I want to run because I want to make a difference. I want to contribute to this community. I want to build on the foundation that I've laid, and I want to make sure that the structural deficit and all the other things that have plagued this city are going to be put to rest for once and for all. And I really believe that ultimately we've got to make those changes. They're painful, they're arduous, and certainly people are angry and frustrated. They ought to be. But they also ought to be reasonable and patient and understand that you can't make a change overnight. You can't wish it away. There aren't microwave solutions. There are no quick fixes. And you can't place all the blame on one individual. We all share in that responsibility, and Mr. Dang is no exception to that. He's been a leader. He talks about his leadership, but yet he seemed to follow all the blame for the last 16 years in the city for the problems, and none of the solutions fall on my shoulders. That, I believe, is indicative of an individual who really is misguided and somehow so ambitious that he's lost a sense of his soul. I hope he gets it back before the election.
Okay. Please, let's keep it down. I'd like to ask you to hold your applause. Mr. Dang, why do you want to be mayor?
I'm running for mayor because I want to make Oakland the world-class city that it should be. I want my kids to grow up in a safe, peaceful environment. I want my kids to grow up in a city where they can get a decent education, the opportunity to learn from other cultures, and where they can eventually have the potential to be anything that they want to be. I love Oakland. I love the weather. I love the convenience. I love the diversity. But I'm disappointed with the last 4 years. Mr. Harris said in his opening statement that he's beginning to define the possibilities, that he's evaluating plans, that he's starting to do this, he's starting to do that. Well, if he hasn't done it in 4 years, what's he going to do in another 4 years? I'll tell you what he's done in 4 years. He's increased crime 17%. Unemployment is up 60%. We've lost 9,000 jobs. 150 businesses have left Oakland. He is the leader of this city. The responsibility for the progress of the city lies with the mayor. If he can't do it, let somebody else do it instead.
All right. Please, again, ask you to hold it down. We'll begin this round with you, Mr. Dang. In the next year, the council is planning to restructure, re-engineer, reinvent, a number of words are used, city government. What should be the goal of this reinvention, restructuring of city government?
I've been studying city government since 1986. Since 1988, up until recently, I was chair of the City Operations Advisory Committee. And our task force has been evaluating the city budget for many, many years and coming up with suggestions and solutions on how we can streamline government. And instead of making progress, we seem to be taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Over the last 4 years, the number of city workers have increased from 3,500 to 4,500. The number of high-paid, fat-cap city workers, earning over $62,500 a year, have increased 200% in the last 4 years, as we had deficits each and every year. And the taxes keep going up. 4 years ago, Mr. Harris promised no new taxes, but instead, we've had increases in property taxes, transient occupancy taxes, the landscaping and lighting assessment, the library assessment, the fire suppression district, master fee schedules, parking stall fees, and these are just some of the many taxes that have been implemented. People have had enough. We should not have to be taxed in terms of the remaining businesses and the remaining residents in town. We have to cut. In my business, when we have a problem, we cut staff, we tighten our belt, we make the changes we need to remain on a balanced budget. In this city, when they don't have a balanced budget, when they have a deficit, they raise taxes. Compared to other cities of similar size, Oakland spends more in 17 out of 23 categories. And they're the second highest in 2 other categories. That means in only 2 categories do other cities of similar size spend more than the city of Oakland. In terms of revenue, Oakland collects more money per capita than any other city of similar size. And in terms of assessments, Oakland 10 years ago had $1.4 million in assessments that they collect. Now they're up to $14 million. That's 10 times, 10-fold increase over this period of time. And we have 3 times the assessment per capita of any other city in California. So in terms of our fiscal policies, they stink. What I want to do, this is my action plan for Oakland. In it, I elaborate on what I would do. I would institute a performance-based budgeting system, value-based system that will empower the employees we have to do more with less. We have to make them accountable for what they do. But in terms of what the mayor has done, he has not succeeded, and I'm going to have to give him an F for government accountability.
Okay, hold your applause. Hold. We're going to move along. Mayor Harris, the question is, what should be the goal of the restructuring, reengineering, reinvention of city government?
Well, first of all, we've already begun that. We reduced the number of employees working in the city by 600 positions over the last 4 years. In addition, we've done it with a sense of mission, with a sense of priorities. It really is important that you understand that the number of employees are not more in the city than there were 4 years ago. In reality, what we've done, however, is added employees in programs like Head Start, programs for senior citizens and others where federal and state funds have been received as a result of grants. That's important. It's taxpayer money, but it's the kind of thing that I think the taxpayers want us to do, which is achieve and retrieve those resources from federal and state governments that in fact ought to benefit our citizens, where we have a disproportionate number of poor people and a disproportionate number of people who are elderly and in need of social services. But I think it's important that we also understand when you reinvent government, you cannot in fact just become the police and fire assessment district. A city is about a quality of life for all the people who live and work here. If you begin to neglect the least of us, then all of us are going to be lesser for that kind of a neglect. I really believe that it's important that our government be a balanced government, and the restructuring process has got to look at priorities based on the needs of our citizens as well as our requirement of serving all of those who live here. I think when you talk about reinventing government, you can't simply look at bureaucrats and make them somehow the whipping boys and girls for business people who somehow feel that someone who makes $62,500 a year is a fat cat. If people who make $62,500 a year are fat cats, then obviously Ted has to be Howard Hughes. I mean, it's got to be somehow a manner of leveling out, not blaming people. When 2/3 of the people making $62,500 a year are police and firefighters, Ted said, I'm not talking about them. Are you talking about the engineers, the architects, the accountants, the attorneys? Who are the people that you, in fact, believe ought to be removed, and who would you replace them with? It is important that we understand we've got to get the biggest bang for the buck. We don't have the luxury of not being efficient and effective. There's no argument about that. But we must do it as a community. We must do it with a sense of democracy and inclusion. Everyone must participate in that. The restructuring of government must be done in a way that maintains priorities of libraries and parks and recs and all the other things that are critical to the city, including its cultural base and the things like the museum and the resources of government that really do reflect a city that is positive and a city that is possible from the standpoint of its future. I really think that ultimately people need to understand restructuring government is not like restructuring a business. It must be done with a sense of the people, with a sense of human values. And I believe that's what we're doing in the city of Oakland. And if you look at the restructuring task force, you see that it includes business people, people who represent the neighborhoods, people who represent labor. We'll be doing that over the next few months. I hope Mr. Dang will be constructive in that process. None of us can afford to ignore the need to re-engineer and reconstruct government, but we shouldn't do it with a sense of decimation and throwing the baby out with the bathwater and destroying our community in the process of restructuring its government.
Well, we're going to begin this round with you, Mayor Harris, and it's a follow-up to the previous question, a little more focused, we hope. One of the issues of concern to many citizens is increasing the productivity of the city staff and making them a little more customer-friendly. What leadership role can the mayor's office provide in improving the delivery of city services in a way that is more customer-friendly and customer-satisfying?
Yeah, that's a tremendous challenge when you're downsizing. Fewer receptionists, fewer people who are really there to give help to the constituency that we all serve. We are, in fact, working on training programs. We need to do it not only in the governmental sector, quite frankly, but in the private sector as well. Everyone who works in the city is an ambassador for the city, whether they work for the government or not. Cab drivers, people who work in the hotels and the restaurants, all reflect the kind of respect and the kind of attitude we ought to have one towards the other. Citizens towards city employees towards the constituents they serve. Public service is a calling, and people who aren't willing to be involved in serving others shouldn't be in it. We have got to, in fact, work on a user-friendly and, in fact, a citizen-friendly city. We hope to be able to do that as we begin to use our city line so that people will be able to access information from the city clerk and the departments much faster than they have in the past. Computers are a part of life. We also want to make sure that we're making sure that information is available through the media, through the mail, and through KTOP so that people will understand how to access the city, how it is structured, how to get information, how to, in fact, get the services that people deserve that they're paying for in the form of taxes. It is about training people, it's about training employees so that they understand their responsibility, that they understand what courtesy is, and they understand how the city works so they can explain it to others who are outside of the city organization. It is important that education be fundamental and continuing. You can't just do it once, you have to reinforce it with a sense of urgency and with a sense of determination. It is difficult when a culture has been established where often people have seen themselves somehow as alienated from the citizens they serve. We cannot afford that on any level in Oakland. We are all in this together. The people who work for the city, the people who live in the city, people who work and visit the city must in fact see themselves as allies, people who are in fact working together. That establishment of a sense of teamwork is also a critical factor in improving the quality of service in the city and making sure that the employees are listened to, that they are in fact part of a quality workforce initiative, that they have got to be providing suggestions, they've got to in fact help to improve the quality of service in the city. Those are the aspects of improving the attitudes of the employees and simply the sense in the citizens that the people who work for this city, from the mayor through the city manager down to the least of the employees of the city, work for the public that they serve. We know who pays our salary. We shouldn't forget it. Sometimes it seems that we do. I certainly want to be exemplary of understanding that even though the demands sometimes seem unreasonable, even though sometimes people are confused, angry, frustrated, we've got to find a way to make people know that they're wanted, that they are in fact desired not only as citizens, but people who we are here to serve, people we have an obligation to serve, regardless of their economic circumstance, regardless of their language difficulties, regardless of anything. This has got to be a city that is about people and a city that is friendly to all who live, work, and visit here.
Mr. Deng, I'll repeat the question is, what leadership can the mayor's office provide in improving the delivery of services in a way that is more customer-friendly and customer-satisfying?
To improve city services, we have to look at the current problems we have in our budget system. And the mayor actually understands that we do have a problem. In 1992, he said, we have a 5-year budget plan that is value-based, so we are not dealing in a crisis mode from year to year. That's what we should have. We don't have it. 2 years he said we do, but we don't. Every year we are still on a crisis mode because we still have a deficit, and we run around like chickens without a head trying to balance the budget at the last minute. So what we really need to do is institute a performance-based budget system. We have to justify every line item against anticipated results. We have to have more thorough reviews, more latitude for the departments to design their own system. And that way, if the departments do well, they can retain the revenue that they save. And the budget should be based on outcomes, what they produce, rather than just last year's budget. Now, until we are set up to do performance-based budgeting, the mayor has to lead by example. I'll do that by contributing 10% of my salary as an example that all public employees can tighten their belt. Instead, the mayor has set up a hierarchy, a parallel government that monitors the city manager's office. That shows some kind of mistrust of the current city manager council form of government. Right now, we have at least 7 major department heads who earn over $100,000 a year, reporting to deputy city managers who earn $92,000 a year, who report to the city manager who earns $132,500 a year, and the city manager reports to the mayor. And the mayor doesn't know what's going on in all the different departments of the city, so he had, last year, 22 aides to watch all the other departments. Now, can you imagine the memos going back and forth, the meetings going back and forth, the extra clerical help, the extra overhead that it costs to maintain this parallel government? I support the cabinet form of government, where the department heads can report to the city manager and the mayor at the same meeting. And I would cut the number of aides that I would need by more than half. In addition, the mayor should set an example by not increasing public servant salaries, especially his own, when there's a deficit. But he's increased his salary in the assembly 3 times. He's increased his pay as redevelopment director 1 time. He supported the ethics commission, which would have increased his salary another $30,000. And that's not right. When the city is in a deficit mode, you tighten your belt. You don't skim off the cream.
All right. Please, again, if you hold your applause, we'll be able to move along quickly. We'll begin with you, Mr. Deng. In Oakland, we have a council city manager form of government. The mayor cannot act alone. How do you plan to build consensus to implement your ideas and programs, both on the council and in the community?
Again, I support the council manager form of government. It has certain checks and balances to prevent abuses. I thought that it was really odd and peculiar that all of a sudden, during the past 4 years, we had a committee working on a strong mayor form of government that surprised everybody, and that seemed like a power grab. Because I really think the system works, it's just that we have the wrong people in the system. You see, the mayor can do anything he wants. All he needs is 5 votes. And he did have 5 votes. In 1990, he had 5 votes on the city council, but there were 2 council members that he did not support very strongly for re-election, and so he no longer has a guaranteed 5 votes. And as a result, we have a council that is really not able to work effectively. They're almost leaderless. And to give you an example, you all have attended council meetings, you watched KTOP, and you find that a lot of the council meetings last until 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. You know, Ted Gabler said in his book, Reinventing Government, and he said to the council in this very room, he said, the purpose of government is to steer and not to row. And yet we have a council that's rowing around in circles, that on almost every issue they spend their full 10 minutes each giving their opinion on the smallest details in micromanaging the city. Our council members are supposed to be part-time, but I don't understand they have 2 full-time aides. So you see, the purpose of the council members is to provide input from their constituencies on policy issues and direct the staff to implement those policy issues. And the mayor has to provide the leadership necessary to build consensus.
Mayor Harris, how do you plan to build consensus both on the council and the community for your programs?
Building consensus is obviously very difficult in a city of diversity, and certainly the council is no exception to that. Each one of the members of the council represents a different city council district. They come with their own philosophy and their own priorities. Building consensus is something we've been working towards, and I think we've achieved a great deal of success, certainly in the past several years. Working towards consensus, however, means that we have to learn not only about priorities, but also how to, in fact, achieve compromise. And that becomes difficult in a city where you have many competing interests. City council meetings are long because we live in a democracy. People want to be heard. They complain already that they're not heard enough. Yet, in fact, our council meetings do go till 10 and 11 o'clock at night, not simply because the council members are speaking, but also because they're listening to members of the public. It is difficult to try to achieve all of the objectives that people have. Everyone has a different set of priorities, and understanding that is something that I've learned as a member of the city council, and certainly as the mayor. Building consensus beyond the council and the community at large is also very difficult, because you're really trying to find a way to balance, again, priorities, but also to find a way to meet needs with decreasing resources amidst increasing demands. Mr. Dang throws out a lot of statistics that are really untrue. And that bothers me because it really means that either there's a lack of integrity or a lack of understanding of how the city government functions. He talks about the size of staffs and a lot of other things that are completely erroneous. He talks about salary increases that are erroneous. I don't even receive a salary as part of the redevelopment agency. I'm not proud of it. I never received it, so obviously I couldn't have increased it. But he says those things with kind of incredible, I don't know how anyone can stand there minute after minute, statement after statement, and talk about building consensus when you deal in fragmentation and division as a candidate. How can you build consensus on the council, Mr. Dang, when you in fact don't deal with the truth as a candidate? It is really important that we talk about the reality of a city that does have a lot of division, a city that has to find a way to get on the same plate. The hills and the flatlands, black and white and Asian and Latino, people regardless of the difference, understanding that we may have come here in different ships, but now we're all in the same boat. We have got to work together, not find ways to divide ourselves from each other. It is hard getting people to understand that. I've worked for that, and I obviously have a lot more work to do, but I've not done it by finger pointing. I've not done it by casting blame or complaining about things. I've really done what I think is appropriate. I've done it with integrity, and to hear Mr. Dang talk about scandal and all these other things really makes it difficult to maintain focus in the course of a debate. But let me say this, I will work, I will not divide this community in the course of this campaign, and more importantly, I'm going to work with my colleagues, and when I don't understand them, I'm going to try to listen more than I have. I'm going to try to understand that not only do I have to be humble, but also I've got to be able to communicate with people more effectively. It is a difficult job. I tell you, I've never had a more difficult job than being mayor of the city of Oakland. It's a lot harder than being in the assembly. But I certainly believe that I've learned and that I continue to learn. God's not through with me yet. Maybe Mr. Dang is.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Obviously, it's hard to keep order with this audience. Well, I'll remind you one more time to hold down your applause until the end. All right, we're going to begin this round with you, Mayor Harris. It has to do with public safety. Public safety and reducing crime is obviously the top priority for many of our residents. How can Oakland afford to fund more officers? And if we do are able to fund more officers, what should the mix be between community policing and officers on what we think of as the regular patrol?
Well, I believe that, first of all, we have been moving towards community policing. It really is a different style of policing. It's not as reactionary or crisis-oriented. It really is about responsiveness. It really is about interaction and working with the community with a sense of partnership. That, I think, is fundamentally important. We have seen a reduction in our police forces, not only in the past several years, but in many years past, over the past decade, certainly since Proposition 13. We don't have 30 positions less this year than we had last year. We have roughly 705 positions on the department, including the 16 people who are now in the police academy that we received as a result of funding from the federal government. I've been working with Senator Feinstein and Boxer with the crime bill. That will, in fact, give us another 140 police officers. We may have to pay up to 25%, but it's a lot less than the $7 or $8 million Mr. Dang thinks he's going to find somewhere in an already depleted city budget. $8,000 is not going to get a tenth of a police officer, Ted, and to say that is just irresponsible. You've got to really deal with real numbers. You can't cut $7 or $8 million out of the city budget and not do damage to the infrastructure, not do damage to parks and rec and libraries. Our police department is an integral part of our city, but they can't do it alone. We've got to have things for our children to do. We've got to make sure that our libraries are functioning. We have got to be about a city that is balanced in its delivery. Community policing really is involving a sense of forward thinking, a sense of crime watch. It's a sense of walking beat patrols. It has got to be a change in the culture of the police department. We have to make sure the police officers understand they can't just ride around in their cars and respond to crime. They've got to prevent crime. That's why the DARE program is so important. That's why the community relations department is so important. That's why we have got to make sure that everyone in this community knows they've got to partner with the police. You can't ask the police to do it alone. We have got to make sure that everyone in this community is working to make sure that this is an interactive and positive crime prevention strategy. People locking their doors in their cars and their homes. People shouldn't have to be afraid. Every crime is a crime against individuals that is regrettable and reprehensible, but it happens. How we deal with it has got to be more constructive than finger pointing, and don't throw out false statistics. The crime rate has gone down. It is important that people understand that. He ought to know that.
Sure. Quiet.
The crime rate has gone down. Every victim is a victim too much. I take no pride to see that anyone is hurt or have their property damaged as a result of crime. But that is something that is happening throughout this country. Ted needs to be about trying to do something about handgun control. I've been fighting for that. Ted's got to do something about working beyond the issue of just talking about jobs, but creating jobs. Ted was chair of the Chamber of Commerce. How many jobs did he create? How many businesses did he save? I set up a citywide business retention program to make sure that we're not just talking about crime prevention, we're talking about economic development, we're talking about a whole life and a quality of life for people who live in the city. Community policing is essential. The whole department has got to be involved in community policing, from the chief down to the guy who's working in patrol. It has got to be about each of us taking self-responsibility for our own children. That's why I support a curfew. We have got to exercise responsibility over our kids. We're the first generation of people that have to be afraid of their own children. The police shouldn't be controlling our children. We should be controlling our children.
Okay.
But to somehow act as if the mayor can stop crime is a power that Ted doesn't have, and he shouldn't act as if somehow he's going to be able to stop crime without the support of the people in this community.
We'll give a little more. I'd like to ask you all, the emotion is escalating in the room, so why don't we all try to hold our applause again, and we will move along quickly, and they'll be able to respond. So I would ask you to restrain your enthusiasm, and we will move ahead. Mr. Dang, the question is about public safety and the balance of community policing officers versus sort of patrol officers.
Yes, when I said earlier that Elihu has contributed to the crime problem, I was serious, because in the assembly, I've examined his record, and I'd like to share those findings with you.
Let's let him answer, and so that they can hear it at home. It's harder for them to hear at home if we talk. We'll give you a few seconds on that.
Elihu voted to let wife beaters off with as little as an infraction. He voted to repeal mandatory sentencing for drug criminals. He voted to allow convicted criminals to choose their own prisons. And he was only one of 10 legislators to vote against keeping drug paraphernalia away from young children. In Oakland, he voted to cut $200,000 from the DARE program that he bragged about. He cut $9 million from the police budget in the past 2 years. And he even told the San Francisco Chronicle that he would think about decriminalizing dangerous drugs. Unlike Elihu, I don't want to decriminalize coke, decriminalize heroin, or cocaine. I want to fight to bust these drug dealers and give them the maximum sentencing that we possibly can. After 4 years, violent crime is up 17%, assault is up 5%, and robbery is up 40%. 142 fewer cops are on the beat today than we had in 1965. And yet in the past 10 years, the number of arrests have gone up 33%, the number of calls to 911 have gone up 25%, and the average number of crimes per officer now stands at 68.8 per year per officer compared to 20.6 in the 1960s. These came directly from the police department reports. A person has a 700% better chance of being murdered in Oakland than in San Jose. Now what I want to do, again in my plan, I want to hire 100 new police officers and put them on the beat within my first year of office. And the reason why we have to do that is in the short term, we have to make the residents and the businesses feel safer before they would stay or before they would come to Oakland. And we have to expand after-school programs. Last year, after-school programs only came out to $250,000 for the entire school district. That's less than $5 per kid per year. How can we keep our kids off the streets if we don't provide them more funding? When I visit our public schools, I notice that after 3 o'clock, the libraries close, the rec center closes, and the kids just kind of hang around. They kind of hang around until their parents pick them up. They have a chance to get into trouble. On the crime bill, I supported the crime bill. I voted for Dianne Feinstein. I voted for Bill Clinton. They supported the crime bill. Our congressman didn't. Whereas other mayors went back to Washington to lobby for its passage, our mayor stayed home. We have to, if you want to increase the number of cops, you increase the number of cops. He voted to cut 30 cops last year.
Thank you. All right. We'll begin this round with you, Mr. Dang. And keeping on the issue of public safety, the part of the question was, though, everyone understands that while demand for city services, including police, remains high, the ability of government to generate new revenues to fund new police officers and do a lot of programs is low. How do you balance these two demands, and where will the revenue come from to fund additional police officers?
I developed the Oakland Family Safe Plan, where I presented a way to raise $7 to $8 million to fund the cost of 100 new police officers. This plan has 3 components. The first is to increase the revenues that we're entitled to. For example, in the Oakland Hills, there's a lot of construction because of the rebuilding after the firestorm. A lot of the contractors in the Oakland Hills do not have business licenses. We did a test just taking names off trucks that are parked in the Oakland Hills, and an overwhelming majority of them, more than 70% of the quick test that we made, did not have an Oakland business license. Just by making sure that the building department withholds their final approval on building permits until the contractor presents a complete list of every subcontractor on the job with their business license tax number, I estimate we can collect $2 million. In addition, as a realtor, I know that when I sell a house or a property in Oakland, I pay my share of business license taxes. But at the title company, I know there's other realtors who have offices in other cities that have also sold homes in Oakland. They do not, many of them do not, pay their fair share. And I contacted the business license tax department. And I said, all you have to do is to have an ordinance that requires the title company to withhold disbursements of commission checks until the real estate company presents their Oakland business license. The business department said, oh, we can't do that. I then called the title company. They said they'll be happy to do that. In addition, there's an example on the corner of 12th and Franklin Street, the parking lot where the Oakland Tribune used to rent. And that parcel has been vacant for many years. It's supposed to be the site of Hotel 2. But it's been vacant, occupied by no one but just pigeons. And All Right Parking presented an offer to the city to rent that site for $6,000 a month. They presented it in December of 1993. That lot is still vacant. That lease is still not signed. Because of all the issues that I've been raising, the city finally came out with a request for proposal. But that request for proposal is so lengthy and so complicated, All Right Parking isn't sure they want to submit the bid anymore. In addition, my plan calls for cutting certain city departments that have bloated bureaucracies. And in those departments, primarily in general government, we can save another $1 or $2 million. And finally, we can reprioritize certain sections of the existing budgets. For example, the city jail cost us roughly $6 million a year to operate. It costs us $123 per inmate per day. The county can do it for $86 a day in the North County Jail that's right next door. And they do it by contracting out. Meals are delivered to the site, the prisoners serve themselves, and they clean up after themselves. At the city jail, we have a staff of kitchen aides, dishwashers, cooks, custodians, 100 people that cost us a lot more money. Just by turning it over to the county, we can save another $2 million.
All right, we'll move to you now, Mayor Harris. The question is, how... All right, please, let's keep it down. Again, all right, we're going to move ahead and allow Mayor Harris to answer. The question is, how do we, with the demand for city services remaining high, including police services, how do you balance the demands of generating new revenue and keeping services levels up, increasing them?
Well, first of all, it is very...
Something along those lines. Try it again, huh? Really, the question is, how do you, given the limitability of government to raise revenues, how do you balance the demand?
Well, first of all, it is very difficult. And when you try to balance the budget, you first of all have to understand what the budget is and what it contains and the limitations that exist, not only for the mayor and the council, but the charter also makes it very difficult to sometimes deal with the things that Mr. Dang has described. For example, he talks about saving money in the mayor's office by cutting 10 FTE from the mayor's office. Well, if Mr. Dang had read the city budget, you'd know that's all the mayor's office has, is 10 FTE in the general fund. It's important that you not exaggerate the reality of a budget difficulty that really does demand scrutiny and a real sense of reasonableness. Let me just talk to you a little bit about some of the issues relative to balancing the equities in the budget. When you talk about the collective bargaining agreements that often lock in salaries for a number of years, it's very difficult to all of a sudden talk about reversing those salaries without going through a collective bargaining process. You also understand that under the city charter, there are not only meet and confer rules as it relates to overtime and other aspects of the city operation, but also binding arbitration. That means that the city council and mayor often have no control in setting salaries. It's done by an arbitrator. Those are things in the charter, and I haven't seen Mr. Dang speak up and talk about changing the charter to make sure that it does, in fact, give the mayor and the council more power over some of these kinds of issues. It is also important, I think, that you understand that in putting together a city budget, you, in fact, have to look at the various funds from which the budget comes. Many of these funds are federal and state grant funds that can't be used for other purposes. Balancing the equities, we are finding that increasingly we're using non-general funds to support health and human services, the Department of Aging. Many of the departments, including Public Works, have a vast majority of their funds coming from outside of the city. The Department of Office of Economic Development and Employment, Housing and Neighborhood Development do not use primarily general funds. Office of Economic Development and Employment use redevelopment funds, some of which is used for the police, and the Housing and Neighborhood Development department uses community development block grant funds that aren't available for these purposes. We don't have that kind of leeway simply to take these funds out of the general fund and spend it on police officers. We've got to generate more revenue. We also have to redefine government and reconstruct it to reprioritize it in a way that allows us to meet the priority. 65 to 70% of our city's budget goes to police and fire services. You can't keep spending that percentage or more and be anything like a balanced city. Again, I don't think the city of Oakland ought to simply be the police and fire assessment district. No one's going to want to live in a city like that. It is important that as you listen to Mr. Dang says, the truth has got to be told. You can't just listen to the quick fixes. It's got us in this fix in the first place. I've got to work us out of it, and I need to do it in a way that is responsible, and I also need to have a way to do it that involves a balance in our city's priorities, not simply a law enforcement mentality that forgets the rest of city services.
All right, following up. We're going to begin this round with you, Mayor Harris, and following up on your... Okay. All right, well. All right, well, we're trying to give them both the opportunity. We're going to begin with you, Mayor Harris. It's following up on a healthy mix for a city.
Let me
That's all right.
let me first ask. Yeah, let me first ask. This is starting to remind me.
All right, that's fine. Thank you. We're fine. We're trying to be fair, asking them both. And
I want everybody to know
them
that's
as
one of
generally-
Ted's supporters. But
Okay.
more importantly, I
No.
also want you to know this is starting to look like a city council meeting.
Okay.
And I hope that we can get back on the
We
page.
will.
I really want to
Ted,
make sure
do
we're
you want to
constructive.
comment, or do you want to comment? All right, what we want to ask in this round is, keeping in the idea of a healthy mix, how important is it for a city to have arts, sports, and cultural organizations, and what priority, how do we keep our arts, sports, and cultural organizations healthy in a time of tight budgets?
I think we have to do it by being creative. One of the things that I've done over the past 4 years is look beyond the city in order to create new programs. This summer, for example, with the mayor's office, working with volunteers and grants and corporate support, we're able to start, continue Camp Read A Lot, that over 1,000 kids between the ages of 4 and 8 learning how to read. We have Read to Me Every Day, where we got parents to read to their children. We also have the Performing Arts Day Camp, where over 800 kids learn to maximize their potential and their talent in performing arts and the visual arts. We also have been working with the Oakland Ensemble Theater, which we recently entered into a reciprocal agreement with Laney College so that they would be able to continue and have the ongoing support of that institution of education to work with them on teaching young people how to be stagehands and all the other crafts that go into the dramatic arts. We also have been working with the Oakland Ballet and the Oakland Symphony in order to strengthen them, working not only on their management, but also working on their fundraising. We have been working with a sense of diligence with our cultural arts. We understand that Oakland is the second largest center in the country for artists. We have not done all that we need to do to maximize their exposure and their potential. But working with artist groups, working with the various institutions that support them, including centers like the Creative Growth Gallery, working with the Pro Arts people, working with the Open Studios programs, we've been able to extend the opportunities not only for people to know the kind of talent that exists in the city, but to appreciate it and hopefully to contribute to its continuation. It's also important that we work with our young people. We've been working with volunteer organizations from soccer to Little League. I sponsor Little League teams, and one of the things we were able to do with the help of Ken Rollins at Otis Spunkmeyer was restore the old Raiders practice field, all with private donations, $350,000 to make that a multi-purpose soccer field to meet the expanded need in soccer. We've been greening all the baseball fields throughout the city, both for the North Oakland Little League as well as the East Oakland Little League and Babe Ruth leagues as well. So we have understood that sports is critical. We work with after-school programs for young people. We've created the Science and Art Integrated with the Lake program. We work to bring funding with the help of Vice Mayor Spees for the Chabot Observatory. There will be a center for science and mathematics and teacher learning in the hills. We are working to make sure the resources come to this community, not only from the governmental sector. As Mr. Dang has aptly described, we don't have all that money. We have, in fact, looked to the private sector and looked to our community for volunteers and support. We need more, but that is the beginning. That is a partnership, a sense of community, and a sense of shared responsibility in the arts, for our children, and in music. That is critical. We've done that, and I think we ought to do more. We all need to be on that page. It's something we cannot neglect if we're going to have the soul of our city expand and also make sure that it reflects the dignity and the pride and the love we have for each other.
Mr. Dang.
I mentioned earlier that last year the city cut the city only awarded $250,000 for after-school programs. That's simply not enough. When I participate as a principal for a day in our local schools, I noticed that after 3 o'clock, the libraries close, the rec center closes, and the kids just kind of hang around until their parents pick them up. Now, when kids just hang around, they have a tendency to get into trouble. What we have to do is open up those libraries for mentoring and tutoring programs, open up those rec centers for arts and crafts and organized sports, and we have to really provide some leadership and bring the business community, the city, the schools, the churches, the parents together to support our young people. You see, when the family is unable to support the needs of their children, society must be ready to step in. And we are all responsible for nurturing and protecting all of our children rather than condemning the less fortunate to failure. Unless we invest in our kids now, it may cost us a lot more in the future. It costs $4,000 to send a kid to a Head Start program. It costs $40,000 to send somebody to San Quentin. And we really need to give our kids an opportunity. For the older kids, we have to give them vocational training, guidance, counseling, and a job A job is the best program of all. Back to the arts again. In terms of the arts, 20 years ago, I was on the Oakland Museum Association board. In fact, Dick Spies was the president when I participated in that. I support our museums. We have some very good exhibit programs, but I also was very involved in the Cultural and Ethnic Affairs Guild because we needed to make sure that our museum showcased just not exhibits, but programs that would be inclusive of the diversity in our city, the cultural programs from all of the different groups that live in this town. At the Chamber of Commerce, we had the Oakland Business Arts Award program. I supported that program, and we continue to recognize the importance of arts in the business community. What I really like to support, though, is the Fox Oakland Theater. I would like to have the city acquire and renovate this landmark facility as a performing arts center that would be unparalleled anywhere in this part of the country. The Fox Oakland is a magnificent Art Deco facility that has the largest performing stage west of the Mississippi. If we renovate that, we can use it to show Broadway musicals, Broadway productions, ballet, symphony, and we can establish an entertainment district that would really bring in business, boutiques, restaurants, and other activity in that part of town. Instead, the city wasted $16 million on the Alice Arts Theater. It's a nice building, but $16 million is too much to spend. They went way over budget for a 220-seat theater with 73 rooms. As a realtor and developer and a businessman, I'll make sure that our limited funds for the arts are well used.
We're going to begin this round with you, Mr. Dang. On November 8th, the voters of Oakland will decide whether or not to repeal the Landscaping Lighting Assessment District, the LAD. If the LAD is repealed, what will be the effects of the loss of revenue to the city budget? And how would you, what would the impact on the city be?
I understand the city finances. And this year, we have a record city all funds budget of $561 million. It's doubled in 10 years. The LAD raises $15 million. Are you saying we can't cut our budget by 3%? I can. In terms of the total assessments that the people in this city pay, I mentioned it before, we pay 3 times more than the next highest city. But there's ways to change all of that. And if we have to repeal the LLAD as a catalyst to force the city council to recognize that the people want to change the fiscal policies, I'm all in support of that. For too long, we have been politely offering suggestions on ways to cut revenues or to raise revenues, to cut expenditures, and to manage our finances better. But for too long, there were always excuses as to why one suggestion won't work or why another suggestion won't work. As I mentioned before, the mayor in 1992 said that we had a value-based budgeting system. What he should have said is we should have a value-based budgeting system, and I want it implemented by X date. There are a lot of things that are still in our current city budget that is mind-boggling in terms of how it contrasts to private industry and in terms of fairness. For example, we have 103 people that receive $280 a month in an auto allowance. And they don't have to submit documentation. They just get a check from the city for $280 a month. Do you do that in your industry or your job? In the city of Oakland, the management people and some of the rank and file also get pension benefits where the city pays for both the employer and the employee share of pension contribution. I wonder how many of you work for companies where they pay both shares of your pension benefits. The city has a sick leave and vacation policy where 1/3 of their time can be accrued and then can be withdrawn at the rate that they're earning upon retirement and not at the rate that they earned it at. These are just some of the areas which I would revise to make sure that the budget remains balanced and we can still cut the LAD.
Mayor Harris. The question is, if the LAD is repealed, what will the effect be on the city budget?
Well, one of the things, obviously, Ted majored in real estate and not accounting, because it really is important that you understand the reality of the city budget. And I'm not laughing or joking, because it really is critical. The city budget does have over $500 million in all funds, but that includes federal funds, it includes some pension funds. We have over $32 million a year the city pays an unfunded liability on the police and fire retirement system dating back to 1976 when the city's retirement system moved over to PERS. It also includes secured and unsecured debt. It includes funds that are in reserve for parking and for capital improvements. That money is not as available as TED represents. And to indicate that you could take a $15 million hit and it's only 3% of the budget is not only a misrepresentation, it is a lie. It is critical that people understand that it is going to have impact. We have to, in fact, look at the impact. Landscape Lighting and Assessment District was put in place in 1988 because when the voters passed Measure M, they had only passed by 51%. The City Council decided that in order to maintain that level of revenue they expected to get by Measure M, they used the Landscape Lighting and Assessment District as a way to maintain that level of income. Whether that was a wise decision or not, it was one that was made. Secondly, what happened was they then merged the Municipal Services Fund into the Landscape Lighting and Assessment District so that all the landscaping, the lighting, the light standards, all those things reflected come from that particular fund. Now, if in fact you remove that fund, it will have to come out of the general fund. That will mean you're talking about going from 65 to 75% of the general fund going for police and fire services. You don't have the flexibility in these other funds to simply absorb that $15.7 million without making cuts in the general fund. And it's fundamentally important that people understand what that impact is going to be. It is not going to be slight. It is not going to be 3%. It is going to be tremendous. And I think that people also need to understand very critically and very clearly that if you're talking about the funding for the city, it has been reduced. The federal government removed revenue sharing in the mid-'80s. Following that, the state is now taking $16 million a year in property tax transfers that it wasn't taking in 1991 because of the state's fiscal problems. We've had to try to make that up, and some of the ways we made up have been draconian and perhaps inappropriate and ill-considered, and we have reversed that. For example, the quarter-only meters, a mistake. We reversed it. We were desperate trying to find a way to maintain city services. You can only cut so much. You can't just cut with the city service without at some point cutting not just fat, but cutting muscle and bone, and at some point even amputating an important part of the city services. It is irresponsible to indicate you can do that without looking at the whole picture and telling the truth about what the city's budgets are, what the revenues are, and how those funds are expended.
All right, we'll begin with you. We're going to begin this question with you, Mayor Harris. In several of your answers, it's been obvious that increasing jobs would do a lot to improve our problems in Oakland. What role should a city government, or can a city government play in stimulating economic development and creating jobs, the role of a local government?
Well, Oakland has been in a state of change, as you all know. In 1970, 70% of all the people in the city worked in manufacturing jobs. They worked for firms like Del Monte at the cannery. They worked in automobile plants like GM and Ford and Chevrolet. Well, those firms left not only Oakland, they went to the suburbs, ultimately left the state, now they left the entire country. Our economy has changed. Now more than 50% of the people who work in the city work in service-related occupations. Increased technology, increased skills are required in order to do that. What we've got to do is change with the times. We have to change our retailing base to more value-oriented discount shopping. We have to understand the reality that our port is a real jewel and an economic engine that drives not only the city, but the entire region. Therefore, we've moved on dredging, enterprise zone, a recycling market development zone that we brought to this city. We're now working on making sure that our international trade development is an important aspect of our job development. We have doubled the size of the Port of Oakland thanks to our work with the President and our Congressman Ron Dellums at getting the Naval Supply Center converted to the Port of Oakland. We're also working to create more of a base for new technologies. Firms like TRW Financial, Envisions, and Nextel have come into our city. We are really working at creating the new economy for our city, an information-based economy, a service-oriented economy. Bringing in governmental centers here like the state building and the federal building are important because they give our downtown a critical mass of workers that help to spin off retail. Now what we have to do is create a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week downtown so that our businesses will be able to thrive and be able to have the kind of economic support that operates not just 9 to 5, but 9 to 9 or 10 to 10. It is important that we understand these pieces are critical and must be put in place methodically. Again, there are no quick fixes. We are talking about a California economy that has declined dramatically in the past 4 years alone. Aerospace and defense have gone out. Base closures have come in. We are no longer going to have the economy we had in the past. We're moving toward a peacetime economy. The conversion of the Oak Knoll Naval Center, a naval base, is a naval hospital, is another critical part of an opportunity to create new jobs, but also be mindful of opportunity for the residents who live there for recreational facilities as well. We're changing the nature of the Oakland economy. We're bringing in new employers. We're working on neighborhood commercial revitalization, but also working, I think, on something else that's tremendously important, and that is business retention, saving the businesses that we have, working with them. We've set up a micro loan program to work with them. We're setting up entrepreneurial programs through the Oakland Business Development Corporation. These are important things that we have to do. Small businesses are the backbone of the city. While we create the large corporations and work to attract them here, we've got to make sure that our own businesses grow. It is a difficult challenge in a growing, in a recessionary economy, but we're doing it, and I really believe that all of us need to understand the economic development and jobs, as Ted said, is critical. We can't neglect it. It's got to be at the forefront of our agenda.
All right. Mr. Dang, what role should a government play in stimulating economic development and creating jobs?
Well, I would do a lot of things different than Mr. Harris has done, because for the last 4 years, we've seen very little economic development. All we've had under his administration are plans. Oakland Sharing the Vision, the Downtown Redevelopment Plan, the Vision for Downtown Oakland, plan after plan. But the problem with plans is as soon as they're completed, things change, and then it's too late to implement those plans. We need action. In addition, some of the decisions and some of the votes he's made over the last few years are contrary to the idea of creating jobs and bringing in business. He was the only one on the city council to vote against dredging. He was the only one on the city council to vote against a loan to Yoshi's that would bring in jobs and business in Linden Square. When I went to Sendai on the Chamber of Commerce and Mayor's Conference, I went with Frank Ogawa, where we made some very good connections with the Japanese government and Japanese businesses. The mayor stayed at home. When the conference was in Sacramento, I spent 2 days there making contacts with the Japanese dignitaries. Mr. Harris came up for lunch, and then he left. Mr. Harris voted against the Community Reinvestment Commission that would monitor fair lending laws in low-income neighborhoods. He didn't support an agency that would prevent redlining in the poorest communities of Oakland. Now, what I would do, as a businessman, I understand what we need to attract and retain business. I spent a lifetime creating jobs, balancing a budget, focusing on the bottom line. And yes, I hire a lot of African Americans. I would speed the development of the intermodal transportation facility. The one benefit from the closing of the naval bases was the availability of the Naval Supply Depot land. It will allow us to double the size of the maritime terminals. And we have the fortune of having our rails right next to our docks. We can offload the containers onto the trains and ship them cross-country right away. We have to get that facility built and be able to get in new business before Long Beach and Los Angeles does theirs. And they're spending $500 million trying to do it. Instead, the mayor tried to take over the port. Leave the port alone.
All right.
We need to revitalize the downtown area. We used to have 6 department stores downtown and 1 in North Oakland, Sears, and 1 in Fruitvale. We only have 1 left, Catwell's. And unless we change our economic development policies, Catwell's will leave too. I know how to sell Oakland. I've been selling Oakland to investors, to buyers, to tenants for years. As a developer, I know what other developers would look for before they would build an office building, shopping center, or apartment complex in Oakland. And I'll use those skills to sell Oakland.
All right. We'll begin with you, Mr. Dang. Oakland is one of the most diverse cities in America. What actions will you promote to ensure fair representation of all segments of our increasingly diverse population?
One of the main reasons why I want to continue to live in Oakland is the diversity. I want my kids to have the chance to learn from other cultures, from other ethnic groups. You can't do that in Hong Kong. You can't do that in Kansas City. You can only do that right here in Oakland. Everybody in Oakland wants to improve their quality of life. They want to better themselves financially, physically. They dream that one day they can attain a certain standard of living that will allow them to have the tangible benefits and the intangible benefits that all Americans are entitled to own their own home, to have a decent job, to have safety. Unfortunately, that dream has been tainted over the last few years. Many people don't have a job. 1 out of 10 Oaklanders don't have a job. Many of them are African Americans. 28% of the African American able-bodied people in the city of Oakland do not have a job. And a 1% increase in the joblessness equates to a 4% increase in crime. So it's all tied together. Unless a person has a job, how else is he going to earn a living? He can turn to drugs, crime, or welfare. All of those alternatives are not good. We need to recognize that we need to provide vocational training for those people that don't want to go on to college and provide them an opportunity for real careers, not just minimum wage jobs at Pack and Save, Costco, Smart and Final. When you look at all of the assets in Oakland, the industries in Oakland that are on the emerging list of growth businesses, transportation and distribution, biotechnology, environmental remediation, international trade. Why can't we train our people for careers in those industries? Why can't we match the curriculum in our schools and in our junior colleges to train people to be better prepared to take those positions? When a survey was done of Oakland businesses, the number 1 and number 2 priorities that they emphasized needed attention was number 1, lack of a qualified workforce, and number 2, crime. The city has not addressed those issues seriously enough.
All right, Mayor Harris, the question is that Oakland is one of the most diverse cities in America. What actions will you promote to ensure fair representation of all segments of our increasingly diverse population?
As I've said repeatedly, diversity really must be a strength in the city of Oakland. Finding a way to include all of us, regardless of our gender, our religion, or orientation, is really a problem that we must work out to reach to each of us, making feel that everyone feels included. Certainly setting up a Human Relations Commission is an important part of that. Certainly all of my appointments to boards and commissions have reflected both gender and racial balance. My own staff, I didn't just hire black people when I got started running for mayor. I really wanted to make sure that there was a diverse workforce working not only within my office, within the city, throughout my public service career, because I really do believe in diversity and inclusion. But trying to make sure that there is a diversity and inclusion in the workforce also has to be reflected in terms of how we in fact interact one with the other. Certainly the mayor has a responsibility in that regard, but each of us has to find a way to hear each other's stories and to listen to each other, to not be angry with each other, to see each other as somehow competing rather than cooperating, being more collaborative and communicating with each other in our churches, in our homes, in our schools. That has got to be what makes Oakland more successful. It's got to be about not blaming or complaining, but finding a way to link hands and link arms to achieve progress. That's something that I think does not come from negativity and name-calling and blame. I also would tell you that it hurts me with a great deal of pain when I understand the reality of what's happening not only in the black community, but in all communities where jobs are lost, where in fact there has been long-term pathologies of unemployment, of poverty, of health care neglect, lack of adequate housing, and fighting for those things are what I have been doing during my service in public life. And I am not a career politician. I consider myself someone who really wants to be involved in improving the quality of life in my community and trying to make a difference. And obviously that's difficult. And obviously Mr. Dang thinks he could do better, and he should be out here talking about doing better. All of us have that responsibility. There's nothing wrong with being a candidate. But but it is wrong to start talking about how, in fact, the problems all rest on one person's shoulders. Each of us has a responsibility. We need to all be more entrepreneurial, more producers, less consumers, creating the kind of capital bases in this community through banks and savings and loans, insurance companies, to make sure that the capital exists to create new businesses, trying to make sure the small businesses have the support they need, making sure that our neighborhoods are going to have the kind of services and the kind of quality of life that really does not only reflect diversity, but also reflects an understanding and a tolerance one for the other. I also would hope that what we'll be able to do is establish the kind of training programs that will, in fact, give people those opportunities. That's why the Quality Workforce Initiative, the School to Work initiatives, the Academies programs have been part of what we've been stressing. They've not been neglected. I don't want anyone to believe that we've not been working on diversity, we've not been working on change and job training programs and entrepreneurial opportunities. It's hard. The institutional racism that exists in the society is very real. We all have that opportunity. There's no disagreement with Mr. Dang about working on diversity. What we really have to do is all get on the same page and not get on blaming each other and trying to find fault all the time.
Okay, this is our last question. And it's just to close it off here. You know, it's tough to be a young person in 1994, not just here in Oakland, but in America. As a final remark, what do you want to say to our young people to give them hope?
First of all, that it is hard, that times have changed. The circumstances in which I grew up certainly were a lot easier in many ways than the circumstances in which many young people are growing up today. That there certainly are the threats to bodily violence. There certainly are the distractions, the temptations of drugs, and all the other vices that seem to have permeated our society. But the reality is that life has always been a struggle, and it's never been easy. It's always been about people having a sense of their own capacity, willing to take their own individuality and maximize their human potential, but also maintaining a sense of community, giving something back, caring about other people, respecting each other's property, and understanding that in the final analysis, all we really have is each other. If people in this community would treat their children with a sense of dignity and respect, the children would then in turn respect their parents and other people's parents, grandparents, their elders. We would sense a respect from our children that in fact would demonstrate that we're investing in them, we care about them, and we really want them to know how much we love them. We know that they have potential, we know that they have value, and we're going to raise our expectations. We're also going to give them the support in school, the support after school, extracurricular activities. A whole village raising a child has got to be more than a concept. It has got to be reality in the city of Oakland. Young people also have to share in that responsibility. Older youngsters need to teach younger ones. We have to have a sense that each of us link one to the other. Somehow or other, young people have got to understand that they each have a unique talent and ability. If they will maximize that talent and ability and bring it into this community, we will make a change in Oakland. Only change that I've really seen in the history of my life has been the change that's been brought about young people. The civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, every fundamental change has been when young people with their energy, their sense of the possibilities of life have come to the fore and helped us to create that change. With that kind of commitment, with that kind of principle, it'll happen in Oakland as well. Young people are our heart and our soul, our most important resource, our most important investment. All of us need to be involved in our schools. All of us need to be working to create after-school opportunities for young people. We need to make sure that they understand at the end of the educational rainbow, there's a productive job and a livable wage. They also need to understand that they can't be part of the problem. They have the responsibility to be part of the solution. It also seems critical to me that young people need to have the ability to dialogue with each other, to come to the fore, to participate in public sector decision-making, and to share their ideas. We need to do a much better job of inclusion. We set up teen centers to that regard. We want to make sure that our youth commission is also going to be reflective of listening to young people and putting their ideas into the policy-making process. But finally, I want young people to know that our intense love for them and our expectation of them is going to be matched by our own support. We can't do it alone. Young people have to know we're there together. Young people, old people, all people working together to make Oakland what it ought to be.
Mr. Dang, what do you want to say to our young people to give them hope?
I want all of our young people to get the best education they possibly can get. And it's unfortunate that the mayor has not been able to do the same. Because 4 years ago, he ran on an educational platform. He said that he thought that he could reverse the decline in education. And he said that the success of my administration will be reflected by the success of our schools. And if we hold him to it, he's failed again. Just take a look at what's happening to our schools. The dropout The dropout rate has increased nearly 50% since 1986. It's now at 29%. 30% of Oakland students are truant on any given day. Violence in the schools have been cited as the #1 reason students decide to skip school. And Harris voted against implementing Prop 98, which was a $1.5 billion voter-approved school funding initiative aimed at helping needy children. I support Measure C, which is coming up in November, and urge all of you to do the same. What I would do to improve our schools is to have a zero-tolerance ordinance for children who bring guns or knives to school. I'll do my part to make sure students are well prepared and ready to learn. And we have to increase the monetary support for after-school programs. We have to make sure that those who graduate with a diploma know how to read and write. I support a full city uniform policy. I support the concept of having schools and teachers compete for funds to try new ideas. I support charter schools. And I support having a program that provides for superior pay for superior results.
All right, thank you. All right. Before we move into our closing statements, I want to remind you all, as we are here tonight, it's just the beginning of a 2-month election season. You have many questions. There'll be other opportunities to ask the candidates. I'm sure they're always available to meet with you individually. I want to thank you, before we move into the closing statements, for coming tonight. Now we're going to move to the statements in the reverse order of the opening statement, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Dang.
I'd like to thank the League for sponsoring this debate, and I'd like to thank the mayor for finally agreeing to debate me. Mr. Harris has been in politics for 16 years, 12 in the Assembly and 4 as mayor. And I'm outraged that in the course of his 16-year career, Harris has voted himself 4 pay raises while thousands of Oaklanders have lost their jobs. I'll never support a pay raise, and I vow to give back 10% of my salary. I'm running for mayor because Oakland can't wait another 16 years for new jobs. It can't wait another 16 years for a stronger economy. It can't wait another 16 years for safer streets or a better educational system for our children. I'm running because I have 2 children of my own, Jeffrey and Stephanie. And my children are the same as yours. They're bright, young, and full of dreams. And as mayor, I'll do everything possible to see that your children, as well as mine, are protected from violence, unsafe schools, and the dead-end economy that career politicians have left for the next generations of Oaklanders. We did not inherit Oakland from our parents. We are only borrowing it from our children. And what we're leaving isn't acceptable. Over the past 16 years, violent crime in Oakland has escalated dramatically. It's up 17% in the last 4 years, 616 murders, and this year we're at a rate that will break our homicide record set in 1992. And still, Harris voted to cut 30 cops in June. Putting a lid on violent crime means getting tough on criminals, not decriminalizing drugs or giving lenient sentences to violent criminals. It means voting to add cops, not to cut them. I'll fight to hire 100 new police officers, and I've outlined a plan to do it without raising taxes. Unemployment is up 60%. 150 businesses have left town. Now 9,000 jobs have been chased away. And instead of forcing taxpayers to fund the false illusion of a downtown turnaround by building non-tax-paying government buildings, I'll attract private businesses and private industries that expands Oakland's tax base and create thousands of jobs that will fuel Oakland's economic comeback. The mayor's latest proposal is to have a sign on certain sites in Oakland to say, something's happening here. If something's happening there, you will need a sign. The truth is, it's not Oakland that's failed, it's Mr. Harris who has. And what each of us must ask ourselves are the following. Are we safer in our streets and in our homes than we were 4 years ago? Are our children safer in our neighborhoods or schools than they were 4 years ago? No. Is downtown Oakland cleaner, busier, and more prosperous than it was 4 years ago? No. Are we creating more jobs and opportunity than 4 years ago? No. Are schools more effective than 4 years ago? Do career politicians deserve more perks, privileges, and pay raises like Harris voted for himself? No. If the answer is yes, then you probably won't be voting for change. But if the answer is no, then you can rest assured I will use every ounce of my ability to put Oakland back on track. Because like you, I love Oakland. I know we can do better. Thank you.
Okay, why don't you hold it down for a few more minutes. Now our final closing statement, Mayor Harris.
Well, unfortunately, I can't read from a prepared text. But excuse me, could you make sure my time so I can finish my Sir, may I just ask a question before you start my time? I may make comments that people may react to, but I don't think my people reacted negatively when Ted was making his. Please let me make my statement.
All right, please, let us finish the statements.
Thank you. First of all, again, I really do want to speak from my heart. The last 16 years, we don't need mean-spiritedness in this community, even to candidates. I don't want my people to be mean to Ted, and I wish you wouldn't be mean to me. I'm a human being. I'm not just somebody who ran for office. I wasn't born mayor. I'm not going to die mayor. But you don't need to treat me some way that indicates that I'm less than human, that I don't have decency, that I don't care about people in the city. I care about Oakland. I've worked in my public service career because I wanted to make a difference. I grew up believing that politics and public service was the way to make a difference. It's been difficult. You're talking about years of change. You're talking about, Ted talking about 16 years. Problems in this country, in this state, in this city didn't just start 16 years ago, and they certainly didn't start 3.5 years ago. When you talk about crime, there's an epidemic of crime that not only surrounds Oakland, but we don't control our own borders. Drugs aren't all manufactured here. They come from throughout the country. They come from all over the world. We have to understand that in the final analysis, all we have is each other. Just dealing in blame and false statistics don't change things. We have got to be about working together constructively. I've engaged in a shared partnership with the neighborhoods. I've worked to try to make the city better, and certainly I've had failures. No one has been totally successful, and if I had been, maybe Ted wouldn't be running. But the real issue is whether or not, in fact, looking at a balanced record and having a record to look at. I have been in public service for 16 years. Ted cites specific examples that he takes exception to my career. But I voted on thousands of bills in the criminal justice area. I voted on many aspects of legislation that have been important in terms of urban parks, legislation on the environment, legislation that has put people behind jails, but also looked for alternative to incarceration and better educational opportunities to keep them out of jail, spending less money to incarcerate people and more money to educate people. It's been part of what I fought for. When I have voted against something, I've had a reason, and I'd be happy to defend it and argue with you or to simply show you what my rationale was. But for anyone to distort my record and to somehow discount the last 16 years of my life, I believe is inappropriate, and I think it's really mean. I think we've got to get beyond demagoguery. We have got to be about genuine issues and talking about them in concrete terms. We do not have a mystique. The issues are clear. There is no easy answer, and quite frankly, there's more than one answer. Ted simply thinks that every issue in this race is two-sided, his and the one that's wrong. It's not that simple. There's got to be about a dialogue, it has got to be about disagreement, and it's got to be about improvement and change. I understand that. I am prepared to not only defend my record, and I will do that during the course of this campaign, but to work for change and to listen. Not only what Ted has to say, but what all of you have to say as well. We have got to listen to each other. We have got to find solutions. There is no easy answer. I want to repeat that, but I also want to tell you the winds of change are blowing, and not just me out of office, but the change has got to come from your house and every one of our homes and from our children and from a sense of shared responsibility, not just blaming the mayor. Everyone's got to be responsible for this community.
Thank you for coming. Okay. Thank you. thank you all for coming, and thank you for the candidates for participating.